Shabbat Shalom. We are live, I think. Let me do a check. Seems that we are. Yes, we are live. Okay. Today we are going to view some material that's probably going to take about maybe an hour and a half to view. We're going to be looking at some information on the Dead Sea Scrolls as well as Ethiopian Bible. And this material, Stacy had actually sent to me. It was on Amazon Prime, but it turns out it's actually on YouTube as well. It's been here for about 13 years, apparently, thanks to Truth Alliance 7. And if you want to view this without any interruptions whatsoever, you can go over to my playlist. I've got over here. Go to playlist. And this Holy Days playlist. And it's about the... Oh, let's see. Yeah. About the 5th and 6th down. That's what we're going to cover. Okay. Without any further ado. Of course, this is, again, 13 years ago, so assume the quality. It could be a little bit better, but I will tell you, even on Amazon, it's the same quality, so either way. And just as a forewarning, you are going to hear a lot of JC, a lot of Priest, and just to clarify that we are actually speaking of Yahusha here. So just wanted to clarify, just in case anybody was confused for whatever reason. If you guys have any questions, pop them in the comments or in the chat. Here we go.
Qumran on the Dead Sea is a desolate place. Here, after lying undisturbed for 2,000 years, a great library was found, an unimaginable treasure of parchment and papyrus, which came to be known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. Works that have unrivaled importance for understanding the history of Jewish and Christian thought. For 2,000 years, the scrolls lay hidden, rolled in jars. From the moment they were discovered in 1947 in the caves above Qumran, controversy has raged about who wrote them, when they were written, and where they were written. Now, for the first time, scientists have been able to resolve some of the questions which have troubled the scholars for 50 years.
Put a 1 in the chat if you have seen this before. If you haven't, you're in for a treat.
The Dead Sea Scrolls are the greatest find of ancient Jewish documents ever made. They have a central place in the Israel Museum in Jerusalem and in Jewish life. They've become objects of wonder and awe. And they come from an era of which little was known, and only a few tiny scraps of papyrus existed before they were found. They are the oldest known Hebrew version of the Bible, a Bible which does not vary greatly from the text used today. And they're also the rules of a lost community, thought to be the Essenes, who are believed to have lived here at Qumran for more than 200 years, up to and including the time of Christ. For reasons unknown, they left Jerusalem for this tract of desert between towering cliffs and the intensely saline waters of the Dead Sea. When they moved here, they turned their back on the Jewish holiest place, the temple, of which only the huge slabs of the western wall remain. The community seem to have left Jerusalem after disputes with the ruling priesthood to found a more strictly religious society. Their written commentaries on the prophets make clear that they considered themselves the true sons of Israel.
For the Essenes, the temple was central to the Essene understanding of the proper constitution of Israel. But the temple, as it was in their days, they rejected. The high priesthood, they rejected. And they moved to the other side of this mountain ridge. This mountain ridge, of which the Mount of Olives is one end, is the watershed between the Judean desert and the hills of Judea leading down to the coastal plain.
This desert had always been a place of withdrawal and spiritual renewal, a place to prepare for the coming of the Messiah which the prophets had foretold. And scholars have assumed that it was here, in a monastic community, that the sect wrote and studied its parchment and papyrus scrolls. The major scrolls are visited by hundreds of thousands every year and travel on display to all corners of the world. The scrolls have a powerful attraction because, despite the uncertainties about their authors, they seem to lie at the very heart of Western beliefs.
In some way, I would say that the people, when they come into the shrine, come to be in touch with antiquity. The magic of the scrolls is that just by paying a look at the scrolls, in some way you are transported 2,000 years ago. And in some way you are in touch with people, human beings like us, who lived in the land of Israel 2,000 years ago, and maybe that some of them even met Jesus in Jerusalem.
There may be scrolls still in private hands or buried in remote hills, which will cast light on the community. To this day, pieces occasionally find their way to the Israel Museum.
It is really exciting to see a fragment for the first time. And when I recall the traditional story, when the Bedouins discovered the scrolls in the caves, and you think that, that's a pity that I was not part of that story. And today I see myself that in the 90s, I am part of this story.
Although it's a world apart from Jerusalem, Qumran is less than 20 miles away. For 200 years, the members of the community waited here for the end of days, when they would inherit the kingdom. In 68 AD, they're believed to have hidden the scrolls above Qumran as the Roman legions of Vespasian approached, placing them first in these jars. But there is no hard evidence for this theory, which is drawn from the descriptions of the Essenes and their lives left by the ancient writers Josephus, Pliny, and Philo of Alexandria. Now attention is being turned to fresh scientific examinations of Qumran and the scrolls themselves. Nothing much remains of the Essenes, yet it seems that in these scattered and simple graves above the Dead Sea, there are still clues that were ignored in the excitement of discovery and translation. The scrolls have always been more than historical objects. They are steeped in religious and political significance, and so excited fierce competition. Fixing their exact place in ancient biblical literature was of paramount importance. Some of the scrolls were acquired by Professor Sukenik for the new state of Israel. But the bulk of the material was given into the care of a group of scholars and archaeologists, led by Father Roland de Vaux at the French biblical school, the École Biblique, in Jerusalem, then a part of Jordan. Throughout the 50s, DeVoe excavated the site at Qumran and removed some bones from the cemetery. He also decided that this was indeed an Essene settlement. For 40 years, the scholars of the École Biblique studied the material without allowing access to outsiders. This led to charges that the scrolls contained material unfavorable to Christianity and that they were being suppressed by the Vatican. Father Emil Puech, an acclaimed scholar, has worked here for 30 years.
It's written on the popular books, I know that. Even I am accused myself to be a spy of the Vatican, but I never met anybody from the Vatican coming here and say, no, don't do that and do that. I think this is crazy, but people need that in order to sell books, and theories and papers. I prefer to work peacefully, and people will say after if I am right or not.
Father DeVoe is also said to have applied a Christian frame of reference to Qumran in describing it as a monastery.
And DeVoe says very clearly, I never use this word in my books, and I never, because people say, oh, you are a Dominican, you are a monk, and you try to bring everything in your side. I said, no, sorry, I never use it because it would be extrapolation, from the Christian point of view in a Jewish one.
But surprisingly, despite 50 years of scholarship, it has not been proved beyond a doubt that the jars found in the hills above Qumran had anything to do with the community below. Nor has it been proved that the sect itself was an Essene community. In their writings, the sect did not refer to itself as Essene, and there is no mention of Qumran. But a large proportion of the scrolls deal with the rules of a community very similar to the description of the Essenes left by Josephus, who wrote only a decade after the destruction of their community. He wrote that the Essenes, for whom he had great admiration, were a celibate group recruiting promising young men from the cities. He said that once they were accepted, they underwent a period of initiation and finally were admitted to the community after they'd surrendered all their property. Then they were given white linen garments, a hatchet, and permitted to take part in the ritual meals and prayers. He wrote that they bathed themselves, took daily communal meals, and had readings from sacred texts. They work assiduously till an hour before noon, when they again meet in one place and, donning linen loincloths, wash all over with cold water. The archaeological excavations made by Father DeVoe seem to conform to the descriptions left by Josephus. For example, the site itself contains many ritual baths and rooms thought to have been the refectory and the library.
The people of the sect who left Jerusalem had invented these community meals every afternoon, and before they went to the meal, they went down to this ritual bed in order to immerse. In this small room, just south of the ritual bed, DeVoe had found the largest assembly of pottery ever found in Israel. In this area, they found 708 cups, 210 plates. Now, the number of the vessels that were lying here gives us a hint to the size of the community. I just came out from the room which usually are being identified as the room where the scroll was copied, because inkwells and tables were found here. Here, most of the scrolls were kept until the Roman army approached the site, and then they took the scrolls and took it from here to Cave 4.
But the most spectacular find of all was in this soft marl above Qumran. Hidden here by unknown hands was an enormous quantity of documents.
In September of 1952, the Bedouins had found the cave which is underneath me. They found there 15,000 fragments. Those 15,000 fragments belongs to 530 scrolls. Some scrolls, there are 250 pieces, and some scrolls only one fragment has preserved. But basically, most of the scrolls found in Qumran were found underneath the place that I'm standing right now.
Jerusalem plays a major role in this story. For centuries, since the destruction of the Second Temple, Jerusalem has been a city divided by religion and conquered and occupied by great forces. Here in East Jerusalem is the Rockefeller Museum, originally a gift to the Kingdom of Jordan, now the headquarters of the Israel Antiquities Authority. And it is from here that many answers to the secrets of the scrolls may be traced. This trail begins with the restoration of the scrolls. Since their discovery, the major scrolls have darkened and deteriorated. Now, in the laboratories of the Antiquities Authority, a crucial battle is being waged for their preservation.
Y'all paying attention? Simone, eyes up, Simone. Just kidding.
These women are highly skilled paper and picture restorers, emigres from Moscow and St. Petersburg, and they're working on the urgent task of preserving the most precious documents in the possession of the Jewish state. When they first emerged from the dryness of the caves, the scrolls suffered different fates. Some were cut up and sold as fragments.
Can you imagine?
4 were acquired by a cleric, advertised anonymously for sale in the Wall Street Journal, and bought by Israel. But gradually, most of the scrolls and fragments arrived here at the Rockefeller in a variety of containers, including matchboxes and shoeboxes.
They said matchboxes and shoeboxes at Rockefeller Center. Well, not Rockefeller Center, but Rockefeller Place. That's how they showed up.
Now it is all too apparent that the years of display and earlier attempts at restoration have taken their toll.
Общая желатинизация по краям.
Let's trust the Rockefellers. This seems like a good idea.
А здесь у нас нет, это просто капелька чернила.
Ну, это достаточно прочно все. Я считаю, что это вообще не страшно.
Panina Shaw, the Director of Conservation at the Israel Antiquities Authority, is concerned about how best to preserve them.
With scrolls, every day is a new experience, and of course there's a routine that you go into, but whenever we stop to think what we're doing, it gets us all very exciting.
Hers has been a heavy responsibility to ensure that the Dead Sea Scrolls may be read in all their glory in the coming millennia.
We feel it's a sacred work. I mean, we feel the excitement every time, over and over again.
Мне нравятся эти вещи. Я думаю о том, сколько им лет. Я думаю о том, сколько им лет. И о тех людях, которые когда-то давно это писали. Может быть, это были наши предки. Наверняка даже.
Я работала в Москве с памятниками большого исторического и художественного значения. Это были рукописи на пергаменте, но не такие древние, как свитки. И тогда мне тоже было интересно, и я любила свою работу. Я не могу сказать, что в этом плане что-то изменилось. Я понимаю, что это то, с чем мы сейчас работаем, это бесценные вещи, это памятники, сравнить ценность которых очень трудно их приравнять к чему-то.
Wow. This particular scroll is called Pesach Chavakuk. ומה שיש פה זה סלוטייפ? It's one of the non-canonical books of the Bible. There's areas that have been touched and retouched again and again, but otherwise it's in very good condition comparatively, and it's a beautiful piece. טוב, אז בעצם יש לנו את הקטע הזה. The scrolls are unique. Never has such an amount of material been found. When they were first found, the different fragments were scotch taped together by the scholars in order to be able to read them. They then put them in between two glass plates so that they wouldn't move. That was their way of preserving them. Eventually it turns out that the pressure of the plates on the fragments, on the sellotape, is disastrous. All of the residues of the sellotape penetrated into the fragments, and we're now in a state where we slowly take off the sellotape and the residues that have penetrated into the parchment.
So now they got to unstick the tape that was stuck on by accident because of the glass.
If we don't, eventually the fragments themselves or the parchment itself will just disintegrate.
As if it wasn't hard enough already to
But
get
out
together.
of their cases and frames, the extraordinary detail and beauty of the scrolls can be appreciated for the first time. The scroll bindings made separately, the lines made on the parchment to guide the authors, and the corrections written above the lines can be seen clearly 2,000 years later. This is one of the Thanksgiving Psalms. These psalms were probably sung daily by the members of the community. This one thanks God for personal salvation and election. You have supported me in steadfast faithfulness, and with your Holy Spirit, you delighted me. While some scrolls have darkened because of the residues, others were damaged in different ways. The temple scroll, hidden under floorboards in Bethlehem for many years, was damaged by moisture, but it is too thin and fragile to be restored as planned. It is the longest of the Dead Sea Scrolls at 28 feet. This scroll is an attempt by the authors to lay down systematically the rules for temple sacrifice and observance, as well as a description of the rebuilt temple which would come about at the end of days. It is a priceless document, but its state is causing alarm. Now a professor of chemistry and an outside conservation expert have been called in to advise.
We have to try to figure out why the darkening of the scrolls is still continuing and do some simulation experiments to find out what the process is all about. The better we know about the process, the better we can preserve whatever is remain legible.
Very often we come to conclusions that it's better to leave it as it is, in a good surrounding, in an atmosphere of neutral conditions in which we can avoid further deterioration of the scroll, and to leave it as it is, and maybe the next generation will be cleverer.
גם אנחנו. לא, אבל חוץ מזה אנחנו לא לובשים את זה. זה עניין של לבוש.
They said, yeah, no.
In the end, they decide not to reverse the previous conservation work, as the scroll is too delicate. But the restoration has provided one great opportunity: to allow scientists to inspect the major scrolls while they're in the process of conservation. Research is being carried out in many areas, while science tries to fill in the gaps in the scholars' and archaeologists' knowledge. drawing on various disciplines, from police forensics to chemical analysis. The aim is to try to tie the Essenes to the scrolls found in Qumran.
This is the material, the coating or the crud that was found on the scrolls that was cleaned off. In this, as we can see, we have material like insect exoskeleton, we've got fibers, plant parts in here, we have more insect parts. I'm looking at a white fiber, which I'll remove from the dirt and then subject to further analysis. This could tell me that the people that worked on the scrolls wore linen garments.
This little piece of forensic evidence, this little white thread, lends weight to the theory that these are Essene documents, because Josephus says that they habitually wore white linen. Image enhancement also reveals new evidence. Josephus said that among the Essenes, married men were required to put aside their wives for a trial period. This fragment, readable for the first time under UV light, seems to confirm that this was a rule of the community.
A lot of the scrolls that we're working on are actually unreadable to the unaided eye, and it became apparent early on that infrared photography was the only way to work with these. However, now with this equipment, we can actually change the lighting and get the fragments in the best position possible to read these otherwise unreadable letters. We have, for the first time on a copy of the Rule of the Congregation, an injunction which says here, Lo yikrav le'ishto, meaning that the newcomer, when he's joins in, shall no longer approach his wife, which is the first confirmation we have in the scrolls that the Essenes were enjoined to celibacy.
The scrolls, which are mostly written on parchment made from the skins of goats, are also being tested to see if the DNA of one fragment matches the DNA of another. If two fragments found in different locations prove to have come from the same goat, it's clear that they belong together.
We sampled 12 sheets of the temple scroll, and one sheet we sampled the sheet itself and one fragment that was attached to it in order to see whether the matching was correct. We extracted DNA. We got an answer that all the sheets of the temple scrolls has made out of domestic goat. And what was interesting, the matching was correct because they belong to the same individual.
This head louse is nearly 2,000 years old. It probably died in June 68 AD, 30 years after Jesus was crucified. Head lice have not changed in 2,000 years. They must feed every 3.5 hours on human blood. So this head louse may well have come from the head of one of the last survivors of the community of Qumran, before he went out to hide the scrolls as the Roman legions approached. Now scientists are trying to extract DNA from this head louse. It may be possible to find the remains of its last meal. If this can be done successfully, it may also be possible to compare the DNA of the Qumran sect with known DNA of the same period, so providing direct access to these mysterious people.
This louse was found in about 2,000 years old comb excavated in Qumran. The high percentage of infested combs and the high number of lice we found in these combs show that lice were very prevalent at this time.
The Rockefeller Museum may still hold clues. The scroll jars themselves contain vital evidence. For the first time, samples taken from one of these jars will be analyzed in a particle accelerator. The composition of the clay from the jars will then be compared to the clay from the ancient quarries of Qumran and Jerusalem.
The basic premise is that there is no clay on Earth with the exact chemical composition. So if you can trace the pottery back to the clay source, you will be able to differentiate between different clay sources. And that's what we are going to do here. We are tracing this vessel back to the source from where it originally came.
Establishing the origins of the jars is important because many scholars and archaeologists have suggested that the scrolls were taken from the temple in Jerusalem to the desert to hide them from the Romans before the temple was destroyed in 70 AD.
The amount of scrolls that were found in the caves near Qumran is so big that it showed that they were part of a library. And the libraries in this period, in the late Hellenistic, early Roman period, were all in cities like Alexandria, like Antioch, like Caesarea, and probably like in Jerusalem. And in this case, the scrolls probably came from Jerusalem, just before the destruction of the temple.
Jan Gunneveg takes a sample of the motza clay used for 3,000 years in the making of Jerusalem pottery. Gunneveg also takes samples from a kiln at Qumran. Any link between the pottery of Qumran below and the clay of the jars found in the caves above will establish almost conclusively that the scrolls were hidden by the inhabitants of Qumran. It would be almost certain then that Qumran was destroyed by the Romans, the community dispersed, and the scrolls left undisturbed for 2 millennia, as most scholars believe, but no one has been able to prove conclusively. In fact, not all the archaeologists are agreed that Qumran was the major settlement of the Essenes.
I think that Qumran was inhabited by one of the rich people of Judea, an aristocrat, who probably lived in Jerusalem, and Qumran was a kind of manor house, was a center of an estate for growing of probably of balsam and the production of perfumes. And the only connection with people like the Essenes might be that the Essenes were the workers in the estate of Qumran.
Dr. Hirschfeld believes that this site at Ein Gedi, further down the Dead Sea, was the true site of the Essenes, as described by Pliny. And so he calls these simple buildings cells, which suggests a monkish life. But there are also other theories about the origin of the jars. It has even been suggested that this pot bearing the words Roma in Hebrew brought the Gospels from Rome to an early Christian community.
This jar is important because it bears the name Roma. The rest.
Hey, it helps if you have the mic on. Okay, so that's room. That's Wa, Mem, and Aleph. So that looks like in English R-U-M-A.
The Wav, the Mem, and the Aleph. There are some people who think that the jar was imported from Rome. No. What we can prove in analyzing this jar is to prove whether it was made on the spot in Qumran itself, or in fact it was imported from somewhere, and perhaps even Rome.
Other theorists are eager to suggest that Qumran was an early Christian establishment, and that the teacher of righteousness was Jesus, or James. A number of scholars believe that the teacher of righteousness was a deposed high priest from Jerusalem. The massive tombs of the priestly families in the Kidron Valley just outside the walls of Jerusalem are reminders of their great wealth and power. It is likely that the teacher of righteousness left Jerusalem in the wake of a dynastic struggle for control of the temple and its revenues. But the scrolls provide no hard evidence for the identity of the teacher of righteousness. However, examination of the Roma pot will help confirm whether or not it's possible that the teacher of righteousness could have been an early Christian.
I think that the great problem is when the people try to identify some specific characters mentioned in the scrolls as Christian characters or as characters mentioned in the New Testament. But they don't feel that we have to do that in order to understand the significance of the Dead Sea Scrolls for the understanding or study of the origin of the church. Because when you realize that the first Christians were Jews, and the Dead Sea Scrolls, they shed light on Jewish society and Second Temple Judaism, so it's so clear that even without saying that Jesus was part of Qumran, even then, the Dead Sea Scrolls are very significant for the understanding of Christianity because the first Christians were part of Jewish society in those days.
Anyone who has this sort of conspiratorial mentality thinks, well, the gospel story may be cooked up. Here we have material coming from outside the Christian tradition. Maybe it throws special light on it, and then when it doesn't turn out to throw any special light, in those terms of the central affirmations of Christianity, did Jesus live, did he die on the cross, and so on, then they say, oh, well, there really was information there, but someone hid it.
The scrolls themselves talk of the battles of the great teacher of righteousness who led the community into the wilderness with the teacher of lies. The Habakkuk commentary interprets the words of the prophet as the teacher's struggles with the priests of Jerusalem. Because you have plundered many nations, all the remnants of the peoples shall plunder you. Interpreted, this concerns the last priests of Jerusalem who shall amass money and wealth by plundering the peoples. And the Thanksgiving Psalms found in Cave 1 suggest the great schisms in Judaism. Teachers of lies have banished me from my land like a bird from its nest. They withhold from the thirsty the drink of knowledge and assuage their thirst with vinegar. Amazingly, 50 years after the excavation of Qumran, important new clues still lie right here in this cemetery. Physical anthropologist Joe Zayas wonders why some graves are placed on a north-south axis and some, where the women and children were found, face east-west. The bones from the original DeVoe excavation are lost, and at the insistence of the religious authorities, it is forbidden to excavate Jewish burial sites. The fact that women and children were found buried here is important, because Josephus said of the Essenes, "Scorning wedlock, they select other men's children while still pliable and teachable, and fashion them after their own pattern. Not that they wish to do away with marriage as a means of continuing the human race, but they are afraid of the promiscuity of women, and convinced that none of the sex remains faithful to one man." If Qumran is an Essene community, as described by Josephus, a community which recruited young men only in the cities, and from which women were excluded, then you would expect to find men only in the cemetery. Yet when DeVoe excavated the site, as his notebooks tell us, the bones of women and children were found in the cemetery to the southeast.
It is the notebooks of Father DeVoe when he was excavating at Qumran, and it is interesting to check that he was doing a correspondence between the description of the tomb and some rough drawings of the tombs with the skeleton inside. After that you have some estimation of male or female and age and so on.
This has puzzled scholars for 50 years. Joe Zayas now suspects that there have been two different eras of burial by two different peoples.
What I would like to do is take a look at the human skeletal remains. If these things here are of recent origin, if they're intrusive, one of the things you're going to see is you're going to see big differences in preservation. Somebody who's been in the ground 2,000 years, in terms of preservation is completely different from someone who's been in the ground for 500, 600, 700 years.
Night is falling over Jerusalem. In his apartment, Jan Gunnerve gets his results back from the neutron activator in Hungary. From his vast database, he's able to compare the chemical composition of the pots with the chemical composition of the clay quarries of Israel. As he scans the results, the news is truly startling.
The Roma jar has been proven by the data I just get back over here that it is made on the spot, in Qumran itself. It is not important from anywhere. No, this jar was made in Qumran, and that is a fact. The scroll jars found in the caves have all the same chemical composition. And they have nothing to do with anything what we have analyzed from Jerusalem itself. No? And we have analyzed materials from the 9th century BC until the destruction of the temple, and later again the Arabic period. So we have covered, let me say, something like 2,000 years of pottery making in Jerusalem. It doesn't analyze as material from Jerusalem.
This means that the scroll jars did not come from Jerusalem. And if they did not come from Jerusalem, the scrolls were not transported in them from Jerusalem. In all probability, the scrolls were moved in their jars from the library in Qumran to the caves as the Romans approached. This simple experiment has settled one of the major debates surrounding the Dead Sea Scrolls. And whatever the significance of the Hebrew letters on the Roma jar, they do not signify that the jar came from Rome or that there is any connection with Christianity. A small paper, published in an academic journal, has brought exciting news. By chance, skeletons taken from the site in the 1950s to a location in Germany, where all trace of them was lost, have been found in the care of a German scientist who kept them after a university department wanted to throw them away.
Hello, Olaf, shalom, it's Joe from Jerusalem.
Hello, Joe. Come up.
Okay, I'm coming.
They tried to trash these, remember.
Today, these precious bones are going to be inspected in Munich by Joe Zayas. From the skeletons, he'll be able to determine the makeup of the community.
Nice to see you.
Zayas knows that among the bones in Germany are the skeletons of women and children. But he wants to test his theory that these bones are of a much later date.
Here are the boxes with the individuals from Qumran, from the graves from Qumran, without the collection cut.
Hanging out in the bedroom. In the guest room.
I've been waiting 25 years to see this material from Qumran. Do you know what's interesting about this? You see, at the time of death, the person was wearing an earring.
Yes, an earring from bronze.
From bronze, or some
Yes.
cheap metal. Certainly wasn't gold, that's for sure. No, it's very clear here.
Yes, very clear. And here you can see.
It is of crucial importance because he knows that if women and children were buried there at the same time as the men, then Qumran is almost certainly not the site of an Essene community, a fact which would be a terrible blow for scholars and archaeologists alike.
Wow, this is from Davao?
This is from Davao. You sit here, and then you can see the child.
When I looked at the material from the main cemetery, this is sort of typical material which we see after 2,000 years. There's a tremendous amount of restoration just in this one skull here. When we look at the margins of the cemetery, what do we find? We find material which is in an incredible state of preservation. My first reaction was, we are looking at two completely different populations. Once I started looking at the teeth, here's an individual here. This is an adult male in his 20s. The teeth which are missing here, unfortunately, were lost sometime during the process of archaeological excavation. But look here, we can still see that the teeth are in a very good state of preservation. If we go and compare this mandible here, and here's one of these typical desert mandibles, what do we see here? First of all, the front teeth, and we can see that they're almost all gone at a very early age. The other thing, which is the real critical factor here, is look at the dentition. And we can see the dentition, which is already wearing through. This is from eating a diet which is heavily involved with sand. You have a glass of water, you get sand. You have something to eat, you get sand. You have something, fruit, vegetable, what do you get? Sand. As a result, the attrition rate in these people coming out from the desert is twice that of someone who was living in the areas of the highlands. I can't tell you where this man came from, but one thing I can tell you is that he didn't come from Qumran.
Not only has Zayas concluded that the bones of women and children discovered in the cemetery are Arab bones of a much later date, but the jewelry discovered in the graves and neglected in the Rockefeller Museum has been shown to be 12th century Arab jewelry.
Neglected in the Rockefeller Museum.
Joe Zayas' hunch was correct. Bedouin buried their dead in the cemetery, and the original cemetery was exclusively male. We can now say with confidence that Qumran is the place where the Dead Sea Scrolls were studied and composed and then hidden in jars in caves. We can also say that Qumran was the site of the Essene settlement as described by Josephus nearly 2,000 years ago. This barren and deserted place has had a profound influence on Jewish and Christian thought. The dead who lie in this cemetery, only a few hundred souls, studied the Bible, interpreted it, copied it, and tried to live a life of piety and purity in anticipation of the coming of the Messiah and the end of days. For the Christian and Jewish worlds in particular, it is a story full of significance, and it is a continuing source of wonder and speculation. Some mysteries have been dispelled, but there is also a remaining mystery. What happened to the Essenes after the community came so abruptly to an end? The physical sciences will undoubtedly lead us still closer to the Essenes, perhaps by way of ancient DNA, and then we may know for certain what happened to them. For the moment, it appears most likely that when the community came to an end, its members were reabsorbed into the traditions of Judaism. In the early years of Christianity, it's probable that Essenes, Christians, and other Jewish sects were living side by side and debating the great religious issues. Only later, as Rabbinic Judaism and Christianity became dominant, only then was the influence of the Essenes lessened and finally forgotten.
What I find very exciting is the research on the scrolls is an ongoing process. Most of the people, they think that all the story ended up in the 50s, and since then, no more scrolls we have in hands. And today, it's quite clear that, like in this case, we can get new material, shedding a new light on Jewish societies and to understand all the different groups who lived in the land of Israel 2,000 years ago.
Meanwhile, at the Rockefeller Museum, work goes on with the delicate task of preservation, as it has done for years and will do for many more.
I'm not sure how impressive this piece is to you, but to us, because of its grievous state, we find it's quite an achievement. We've had months of research before starting the work on it.
The first aim of the painstaking and skilled restoration is to make sure that the scrolls do not deteriorate further on display, and that the effects of previous conservation work, the penetration of the scrolls by chemicals from the sticking tape, is halted. But it is also a task of great symbolic importance, to preserve the visible and physical links with a distant but still resonant past.
We have managed to clean it and strengthen it as much as possible.
A section of the Thanksgiving Psalms is now readied for display.
And we're now putting it in between two layers of stable text, which protects it. And then we don't sew the scroll itself, we sew all around the edges so that it doesn't move.
The stitching alone of this one section takes 2 days. For 2,000 years, the Essenes was a lost voice, until the discovery and study of the Dead Sea Scrolls brought them to life, and their enduring influence was understood.
A library of what seems to be about 800 books, 800 documents, is an absolutely extraordinary find from a period where if we had a scrap of papyrus with a few words of Deuteronomy on it, we thought we had really got something. Anything that teaches us more about the origins of these two religious traditions, which are happily called today the Judeo-Christian tradition, anything that can give us more information about how Christianity developed, how Judaism transformed itself into something else, is of inestimable value.
The people who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls may have disappeared, but their legacy endures for all time.
Credits. $19.99. What? Yeah, that was a while back. Okay. Thanks again, Stacy, for sending that over, and we're gonna hit part 2. Part 2 would be the Ethiopian Bible. Now this one's a lot more current though. I think this one was like 3 months ago, whereas the one we just watched, the documentary, was 13 years ago. So I hope you all, Mashpaka, were learning quite a bit there. It was a lot of news to me. I can't lie. All right, now this one is also, again, going to probably mention JC and whatnot. Again, they just don't know. They don't know what we know, just to be clear. They're probably going to say God, you know, that kind of stuff. This one does reference Mel Gibson because it's in reference to his research for the making of the part 2 to the whatever the torture movie was that he made. I can't remember what it was called. Correct me. Anyways, y'all are gonna like this.
The Book of Enoch, Chapter 91. The Book of Enoch, Chapter 91. After journeying through the heavenly realm and returning to earth, Enoch is preparing to be taken back up into the heavens once again.
What if the Bible you have trusted your entire life is not the full story? Not accidentally incomplete, but deliberately reduced. High in the mountains of Ethiopia, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church preserved something most of the world never saw. An ancient 81-book Bible with a different structure entirely. Inside it are texts filled with visions of layered heavens and shocking descriptions of Jesus that do not fit the known version.
Can people really see the future? Receive messages from across time and space? For centuries, seers and prophets.
Now, as Mel Gibson, the director behind The Passion of the Christ, moves forward with a long-awaited sequel, he has come across something buried in those very texts. What he just uncovered about Jesus is not a small discovery. It will change everything you thought you knew about him. 2 empires, 2 Bibles. Mel Gibson started with a problem. While preparing his next film about the resurrection, he began digging into early Christian material that most people never read. Not for curiosity, but because something in the standard version of the story did not feel complete. And the deeper he went, the more that feeling turned into something clearer. There were parts missing, entire sections of the story that existed in some places and not in others. And that trail does not lead to Rome. It leads somewhere most people never think to look. In the book of Acts, there is a moment that is easy to overlook, but it changes how this entire story begins. A powerful official from Ethiopia is traveling alone on a desert road. This is not just a traveler. He serves under the Kandake, the queen of the Aksumite kingdom. Kandake is not a name, it is a title, like Pharaoh or Caesar. This man holds real authority. And yet he is sitting in a moving chariot reading from a scroll of Isaiah trying to understand it. Then something happens that should not be treated as small. An apostle named Philip sees him, runs alongside the chariot and speaks to him. The conversation ends with him accepting the message of Christ. This is not a later story added over time. It is written directly into the New Testament in the book of Acts, which means something very clear. One of the earliest recorded people to receive the Christian message was a high-ranking official from Ethiopia. From the very beginning, before any councils, before any decisions about what books would stay or go, Ethiopia was already inside the story. And that is where the numbers start to matter. Because today the Protestant Bible has 66 books, the Catholic Bible has 73. Eastern Orthodox churches include even more, and the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church recognizes 81 books as scripture, 15 additional books. So now the question becomes unavoidable. If Ethiopia was there from the beginning and still holds a larger version of the story, why is the version most people were given the shorter one? Let's move forward a few centuries. In the 4th century, King Ezana of Aksum officially converted his empire to Christianity. Around the same time, Emperor Constantine did the same in Rome. 2 powerful empires, same century, same faith. But they do not end up with the same Bible. One tradition settled on a shorter collection. The other kept more. That split has never been fully explained, and when you start comparing what each side kept, the difference becomes uncomfortable. Ethiopia preserved books that most people have never even heard of. First Enoch, Jubilees, the Ascension of Isaiah, the Shepherd of Hermas, Ethiopian Maccabees. And these texts change how the entire system works. Take the Book of Jubilees. In this version, angels are not distant figures sitting somewhere far away. They are directly involved in what is happening with human beings. It describes moments where angels are physically present when agreements between God and humans are made, almost like witnesses making sure everything is followed exactly. And the conditions are not vague. For example, Jubilees says that if someone knowingly breaks the Sabbath, they are to be cut off from their people, meaning removed from the community and treated as if they no longer belong. In some cases, the punishment goes further and is described as death. That is very different from how most people understand it today. So this is not just an expanded version of Genesis. This is a world where heaven is actively managing what happens on earth in a very direct and strict way. Now look at how this tradition explains the origin of evil. Most people grow up with a simple version from the Bible. A serpent appears, speaks to Eve, she disobeys God, and that act brings sin and suffering into the world. But the Ethiopian tradition, especially in texts like Enoch, describes something much more organized. Specific beings, called watchers, come down to earth on purpose. The text gives their names like Semjaza and Azazel. They agree to leave their assigned place in heaven where they were supposed to remain and enter the human world even though they were not allowed to. Their goal is clear. They want to live among humans, take human wives, and share knowledge that was not meant for people. And when they come down, they do not come empty-handed. One of them, Azazel, teaches humans how to make weapons. Swords, knives, shields, armor. Think about that. Warfare is not something humans slowly figure out. It is introduced. Other beings teach how to work with metals, how to manipulate materials, how to use knowledge in ways that give control. At the same time, they introduce things like altering appearance, feeding into vanity and comparison, so what is taken is innocence, the original state where humans did not operate this way. What is lost is the boundary between heaven and earth, that clear separation that once existed. And what enters the world is something new. Violence that spreads fast. Corruption that does not stay contained. The text is very direct about this. Human evil was taught. It was structured. It was brought in from outside. Now you start to see why these books still exist. Ethiopia was protected by more than distance. Deserts, mountains, and unstable trade routes made it extremely difficult for outside powers, especially the Roman Empire and its church authorities, to reach and control what was happening there. So when church leaders began removing certain books elsewhere, those decisions never reached Ethiopia. No orders, no councils, no forced changes. While others were cutting the story down, Ethiopia kept everything, and the monks went to extreme lengths to protect it. Some memorized entire books word for word so that even if the manuscripts were destroyed, the text would still survive in their minds. Others wrapped the manuscripts in cloth, climbed narrow cliff paths with nothing but a rope in their hands, pulling themselves up sheer rock faces where one slip meant falling to their death just to hide those texts in places no army could reach. So now you are left with something difficult to ignore. One church, in one part of the world, held on to a version of this story that everyone else slowly reduced. And what that version contains is not just different. It is more detailed, and in some places it is far more unsettling than what most people have ever read, which leads to a very strange discovery. One of those missing books is actually quoted inside the Bible most people own. It is referenced directly, but it was never allowed to stay. The book that was left out, but never left.
Guess which one?
The book of Jude sits quietly near the end of the New Testament, and most people read past it without noticing anything unusual. But then you reach Jude 1:14, 15, and something stops you. It says, "Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000s of his holy ones to execute judgment on all." This is not just a random statement. It is taken from 1 Enoch chapter 1, a passage describing God arriving with countless heavenly beings to judge the world and expose all wrongdoing. That means a book that is missing from most modern Bibles is still being quoted inside them. So now the question becomes unavoidable. How can a book be important enough to be quoted as scripture, but not important enough to be included? Now go back to Genesis. Enoch appears for a moment and then disappears. One line says he walked with God and then God took him. No detail, no explanation. But first Enoch takes that silence and fills it with something very specific. It describes Enoch being taken up and shown visions of heaven, where he sees structured layers of the universe. He is shown where the winds come from, where the sun and moon move in fixed paths, and where the stars are kept under command. He also describes encounters where he stands before divine beings who explain what is happening on earth and why judgment is coming. Another area scholars keep coming back to is what the text reveals about events on earth. In that section, it describes how, after the Watchers came down, they had children with human women. These children are called the Nephilim. They are described as massive, destructive, and impossible to control. They consume resources, turn against humans, and fill the earth with chaos. This is where 1 Enoch becomes very direct about the flood. In Genesis, the flood is described as a response to general wickedness. In Enoch, it is a targeted response. The Nephilim are the problem. The flood is not just punishment, it is a reset, meant to remove what should not have existed in the first place. That is a very different explanation. Then another detail starts to stand out. 1 Enoch describes a scene where Azazel, one of the Watchers, is seized, bound, and thrown into darkness to wait for judgment. When scholars compare that to the book of Revelation, they notice how similar the language is when Satan is bound and cast into a pit. The structure of the scene is almost identical, and since Enoch was written first, it raises a question that has never been fully answered. How much of what appears in the New Testament is building on ideas from texts that were later left out? And this is where something much bigger starts to emerge, something that changes how you see Jesus. Inside 1 Enoch, there is a figure called the Son of Man. He is not described as someone who will suddenly appear without context. He already exists before the final judgment. He is placed on a throne. He has authority over kings and nations. He is the one who will judge the world. These descriptions appear in texts dated between the 1st and 2nd century BCE, long before the time of Jesus. Now, when scholars look at the Gospels, they notice something important. Jesus repeatedly calls himself the Son of Man, and according to many biblical scholars, it suggests that Jesus is stepping into an already existing identity, one that people in that time would have recognized from texts like Enoch. So the truth that begins to emerge is this: Jesus was aligning himself with a role that had already been described in detail before he was born. And if that sounds like something that could have been added later, the Dead Sea Scrolls remove that possibility. In 1947, a teenage boy threw a rock into a cave and heard something break. Inside are clay jars. Inside those jars are ancient scrolls. Among them are multiple copies of 1 Enoch, written in Aramaic, dating back to before the time of Christ. And here is the detail that makes it even more striking. Those caves are less than 2 miles from where John the Baptist was preaching. That means these ideas were present in the same environment where the earliest Christian message began. These are the kinds of texts Mel Gibson encountered when he began looking beyond the standard version of the story. And the deeper he went, the clearer it became that the version he had grown up with was not the full picture. Enoch shows you who Jesus was before the world began. But another text goes even further. The unseen descent. There is another early Christian text that goes even further. It does not just describe who Jesus was. It describes how he actually entered the world. It is called the Ascension of Isaiah, and it does not begin the way you would expect. It begins with an execution. The prophet Isaiah is taken by men carrying out the orders of a king who saw him as a threat and wanted him silenced. They force him inside a hollow tree and cut him in half while he is still alive. According to early Christian tradition recorded in this text, this was not random violence. Isaiah had been describing a vision he claimed to have seen, a vision where a figure would descend from heaven, pass through unseen realms, and enter the human world. That message was dangerous. It suggested that the power ruling the world was not final and that something greater was moving through it without being detected. Once those in power understood what he was claiming, they saw him as a threat, so they did not just stop him. They made sure his voice could never spread. Before that death, Isaiah had seen something. The text described him being lifted upward through a structured series of heavens. There were 7 distinct levels. Each one was different from the one below it. The higher he moved, the more ordered and intense everything became. The beings in those levels existed within a system, each level operating with its own structure and authority. Then the vision shifted. Isaiah witnessed a figure described as the beloved begin moving downward. And this was where everything changed. As the beloved passed through each level, he did not reveal himself. He took on the appearance of the beings in that level. When he entered a realm of angels, he looked like one of them. When he moved further down, he continued to blend in. No one recognized him. Not a single being in any of the 7 heavens understood who was moving through their space. He passed through each level undetected until he reached the earth, where he was born as a human. This was not presented as a peaceful arrival. The lower levels were not safe or empty. They were controlled. The text says Satan and his forces were active there, operating in the space between heaven and earth. So when the beloved descended, he was not just moving freely. He was passing through territory that was already occupied. And the only reason he made it through was because he was not recognized. If they had known who he was, the text suggests they would have stopped him. And this changes how the world below is understood. The text does not treat what happened on earth as just human decisions made by leaders and governments. It connects those decisions to the same forces operating in the lower heavens. That means the system ruling the world at the time of Jesus was not acting on its own. It was being influenced from above. So when laws were enforced, when power was exercised, when someone like Jesus was judged and executed, the text suggests those actions were happening inside a system that was already under that influence. Rome, in this view, was not just a political empire making its own choices. It was part of a larger structure, one that was tied to those forces and operating within their control. So when you step back and look at what this text is describing, the truth becomes very clear. Critics now argue that Jesus did not simply appear in Bethlehem as the beginning of the story. He had already moved through a hidden structure, in disguise, unrecognized, passing through layers that were not under his control. The birth was not the start. It was the final step of a descent that no one saw happening. Then the direction reversed. After his death, the same figure began moving upward again. But this time there was no disguise. As he passed through each level, every being recognized him. Each being acknowledged him as he moved upward. This was not just a return to life. It was a complete reversal of what had happened before. He had descended unnoticed. He ascended fully revealed. This is the kind of structure Mel Gibson had been pointing toward when he said the resurrection story was much bigger than what is written in the Gospels. He had spoken about layers, about unseen parts of the story that had never been shown. The ascension of Isaiah matched that description almost exactly. It did not replace the Gospels. It filled in what they left out, showing what happened in the space between. The moment you see all of this together, the question becomes unavoidable, and it is not a comfortable one. Who decided what belongs in the Bible, and who decided what does not? The canon was debated. At the beginning, there was no fixed New Testament. Some early Christian communities read Enoch. Some read texts like the Ascension of Isaiah. Others followed different collections of writings. So the Bible, as people know it today, did not drop into place fully formed. It was built over time, and that process involved real decisions made by real people. And this is the same problem Mel Gibson ran into as he started digging deeper. The more sources he explored, the more it became clear that the version most people were given was only part of a much larger picture. One of the earliest and most disruptive figures in this process was a man named Marcion. He lived in the 2nd century, and he did something no one had done before. He created the first known official list of Christian texts. But his version was shocking. He rejected the entire Old Testament and claimed that the God described there was different from the one Jesus spoke about. That forced the early church into a corner. They had to respond. They had to define what was acceptable and what was not. So the formation of the Bible was not just about preserving truth. It was also a reaction to ideas that were seen as dangerous. From there, the process became more structured. By the 4th century, church leaders began to formalize what would become the New Testament. In 367 CE, a bishop named Athanasius listed the 27 books that now make up the New Testament. Later councils, like those at Hippo and Carthage, reinforced that list. But these were not quiet or purely spiritual discussions. These were debates with consequences. Different groups supported different texts. Some argued strongly for books like Enoch. Others rejected them. And once decisions were made, they did not stay theoretical. This is where the darker side of the process comes in. There is historical evidence that some texts were not just left out. They were actively destroyed. Writings that did not align with what became official teaching were targeted. Copies were burned. Possession of certain texts could become dangerous. And this process unfolded under the authority of powerful leaders. The Council of Nicaea in 325 CE, for example, was called by Emperor Constantine. This was a ruler with political power, a man who had ordered executions, including members of his own family. And yet he was deeply involved in shaping the direction of Christian belief. Critics have raised unsettling questions as a result of this. How much influence did political power have over what became Scripture? And then discoveries in modern times complicate things even further. In 1945, near Nag Hammadi in Egypt, a collection of ancient texts was found buried in jars. Among them was the Gospel of Thomas. It contains 114 sayings attributed to Jesus, many of which do not appear in the 4 Gospels people are familiar with. But what stands out is the kind of Jesus it presents, not one focused on building a church or establishing authority, but one who speaks about finding truth within yourself, about hidden knowledge, and about awakening to something already inside you. In this version, Jesus is not leading people into a system. He is pointing them inward, and that is a very different direction. This text was not proven false. It was simply not included. And this is exactly the kind of shift someone like Mel Gibson has been circling, a version of Jesus that feels bigger, deeper, and less controlled than the one most people were handed. So that raises another question. Was it excluded because it was inaccurate, or because it presented a version of Jesus that did not fit the structure being built? And as Gibson has hinted in interviews, there may be parts of that story that were never meant to stay hidden, only delayed. And that leads to a much sharper question. If texts like Enoch and the Ascension of Isaiah were once read, debated, and in some cases deliberately removed, then the issue is no longer just what they say. The issue is what happened to them after they were pushed out, because not everything was destroyed. Some of it survived. The monasteries. Some of these texts were taken somewhere else and kept alive in ways that are hard to imagine. They were hidden in remote and dangerous places far in the mountains. There were moments in history where invaders entered these regions and targeted religious sites directly. Churches were looted, sacred objects were taken. Manuscripts that had survived for hundreds of years were carried away or destroyed. And yet, even in those moments, the response from the monks was escalation. They hid texts deeper. They split collections. Some carried them further into isolated areas where no army could follow. And then something happened that proved just how important this preservation was. When scholars finally gained access to some of these manuscripts and began testing them, the results did not match expectations. The Garima Gospels, kept in an Ethiopian monastery, were tested at Oxford. The assumption was that they would date to the medieval period, but the results came back much earlier, between 390 and 570 CE. That made them some of the oldest surviving complete Christian manuscripts in the world. Older than many texts preserved in Europe. Older than what most people assumed even existed in complete form. But that discovery only scratched the surface. There are still thousands of manuscripts in Ethiopia that have never been fully studied or even catalogued. Some scholars believe that among them could be earlier versions of texts that later appeared in edited form elsewhere. That means what is sitting in those monasteries may not just be additional material. It could be closer to the original versions of the story itself. And no one knows for sure because much of it has never been fully examined. Then came one of the darkest recent moments. During the Tigray conflict, monasteries and churches were attacked again. Thousands of manuscripts were looted, some were destroyed, others appeared for sale online for small amounts of money. Priests and caretakers were killed. Entire collections that had survived for over 1,000 years were suddenly at risk of disappearing in a matter of months. And this is where the connection becomes impossible to ignore. The texts that describe the kind of story Mel Gibson has been talking about, the layered heavens, the hidden descent, the movement through unseen realms, were not preserved in Rome. They were not protected by large institutions with global reach. They survived in places like this, in the hands of people who risked their lives to keep them intact. So when Gibson began describing a version of the story that goes beyond what the Gospels show, he was not inventing something new. He was moving towards something that had already been written and protected for centuries. And now, for the first time in history, someone with a global audience and a proven ability to make the world stop and pay attention was preparing to take that version of the story and bring it into the open. What Mel Gibson found. Before any of this, you have to understand who Mel Gibson is. Not the director, the man. He went through a very public collapse, alcohol abuse, shameful arrests, a recorded outburst that ended his career almost overnight and made him untouchable in Hollywood. Studios backed away, doors closed. And then in 2004, he did something no one expected. He made The Passion of the Christ. No major studio supported it. He funded it himself, and it went on to make over $600 million worldwide. A man pushed out of the system created one of the most successful religious films ever made. And now, he was not trying to repeat that. He was trying to go further. What he started building next was not a simple continuation. He became focused on one specific part of the story, the resurrection, but not the visible part, the space between death and rising. What happened in that gap? What happened in the unseen? He described it in interviews as something people had never seen before, something much bigger than the version most people were familiar with. And that language matters, because it lines up directly with the texts you have just seen. Then he said something even more direct. He said modern Christianity had been sanitized, stripped down, made safer than it originally was, and he used one word to describe what had been removed: terror. Not fear in a simple sense, but something overwhelming, something that stops you completely. That is important because the texts preserved in Ethiopia do not avoid that feeling. They describe occupied heavens, active forces, hidden movement, judgment, destruction. They are not comfortable, and that is exactly what Gibson said had been taken out of the story. Now connect that to something most people have said without thinking about it. The Apostles' Creed, one of the oldest statements of Christian belief. Inside it is a line that is repeated by millions. He descended into hell. Most people say it and move on, but Gibson stopped there. Because in the tradition of the ascension of Isaiah and in the theology preserved in Ethiopia, that line is literal. It describes an actual movement through a real structure, through darkness, through layers, through territory that is not empty. And that is exactly the kind of story Gibson has been building toward. And he has already shown he is willing to carry the consequences of telling a version of the story people are not comfortable with. When The Passion of the Christ was released, it was immediately attacked. Critics said it was dangerous, that it pushed boundaries that should not be pushed. He did not change it. He released it as it was, and audiences showed up, which proved something important. The version of the story that creates the most tension is the one people cannot ignore. And what he is building now goes even further than that. Because when you take everything together, the texts, the descent, the structure, the hidden movement, something very specific emerges. Not just a different version of events, but a different identity. And this is what Gibson's exploration leads to.
You don't say.
Not just what happened to Jesus, but what he was operating as inside that system. The ascension of Isaiah described a descent where he was not recognized at any level. He moved through each layer without being identified, and that pattern does not suddenly stop when he reaches the world. It continues. The system he entered, the one influencing earthly power, did not fully recognize who had entered it. The Roman authority carried out the execution. The religious leaders pushed for it. But according to this structure, they were acting inside something already under influence. And that system did not see him clearly. That is the truth this points to. Because it means the crucifixion was not just an act of resistance against him. It was carried out inside a system that could not fully see what had entered it, not because he was weak, but because he was operating on a level beyond it. And that is the part that strengthens the story, not weakens it. Because if the system that controlled the world could not recognize him, then it means he was never truly under its control. He moved through it. He was judged by it. He was killed within it. But he was never defined by it. And that is exactly what the resurrection proves. The books survived. The monks protected them. What could be destroyed was destroyed. What could not be reached remained. Mel Gibson found it. And when he brings it to the screen, it will not just show a different version of Jesus. It will reveal something much harder to ignore.
And that's more to the proof of how he literally gave himself. When it talks about how he went through the realms unnoticed, yeah, he gave himself. So that's all I have for this one today. Again, if you guys want to check that out, it's here on the Holy Days playlist. Number 5 and 6 is what we just went through. The Dead Sea Scrolls and this Ethiopian Bible secrets. You can always rewind as well. Check that out. If you guys have any ideas for stuff that we should do in the future, definitely leave that in the comments. Let me know what you guys think or send me a message. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out. And of course, go ahead and share. If there's anything that you guys need from me, let me give you my email address really quick. Go to the link tree, linktr.ee/Nat Zareth. Click on my name there, and that's all my contact info, email address, and everything like that. Free songs, free MP4 videos. There's like 3 different volumes. Yeah. So let me know what we should do next. Shabbat Shalom and Ahabatik. That means I love you. Ahabatik Mishpaka. Rumamu Yahuwah.